Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in today. And today we're gonna talk about B2B2C, what it is, and what are maybe some of the key challenges there. It is definitely an area that gets less attention than B2B or B2C. Today with me I have Marek, with whom we're discussing about our own experiences in B2B2C space, some of the best practices, perhaps. And I think a really nice thing about this setup today was that we could briefly touch up on multiple topics, and if something resonates with you, then feel free to reach out to us or say hello during one of the meetups. So happy to discuss further. Yeah. Anything to add from your side?
I think it's exciting to talk about B2B2C just because it's the future of collaboration where businesses work with other businesses, and I think that's fun. But it's complex and you need to really have control over what's happening, and so I hope that that comes across in our discussion.
Yeah, hope so too. So happy listening.
Johann, it's so good to see you. So glad we could catch up. I'm excited to be here today. I think what's exciting for me is that we get to talk about stuff we know. And I think I'll start. I'll just kind of give a brief talk of like what I think is exciting is that I've had experience in Australia. I've had experience here in Estonia with B2C, B2B. And I think I've seen different growth trajectories for businesses on both paths. I've helped service different customers from both. And they're very different problems, and I'm kind of excited to see what we can unpack and discuss today. And I don't want to spend too much more time on the intro because I think let's get into some details. But please, maybe if you can do a quick intro as well for everyone that's joining.
Yeah, sure. I have also mostly experience in B2B, but also B2B2C, and they're not necessarily in the product management roles, but more client-facing roles. But I think that actually gives a very interesting point of view or angle as well, because as a client-facing team in B2B2C, you get to see very closely what are the business problems and also the end-user problems sometimes. So very excited to see where we get today.
For me, it comes down to end users, right? So the end users are the C. The reason that we are in business is to serve them. But when a business is unable to do everything themselves, they need help. And so the B2B part of it is the business who's wanting to have their customers be successful goes and reaches out and says, "Hey, can you come and help me with this thing?" And it might be the customer support part. It might be the fulfillment, the delivery. It might be, whatever component of the product is needed to be managed, that it's not core business. So it's not something that the business ever wants to go in and overinvest. Maybe when they're super profitable, they might. But in the initial phases, in those first few years, it's not something that they would want to take on as well. So I think for me, it's that support layer. And the B2B, B2C kind of provider, that provider of that help, traditionally needs to be standardized. So it can be a component that can be used for other businesses. So it might work for, like a vitamin company who's selling vitamins, or maybe even the order tracking, but it then also needs to work somewhere else. It needs to work in another industry, in another domain. And if those suppliers are very niche, then they're at risk of basically going, broke and not being able to fulfill that part of someone's business, and that's a huge risk. So I always look at it from that perspective. Is it much different for you when you look at it, or do you have examples that come to mind?
I think the last example is very, very proper in a sense that if you go too customized, then you end up being an agency rather than a SaaS business. And taking some examples from the identity verification business, then we were often competing with the in-house verification departments, and that was like one of the main decisions customers had to do. Like, do they want to do it in-house or do they want to use our expertise? And like definitely the highest value came from the fact that we served a lot of different customers, and we could very effectively use our resources to serve those different customers. So doing some back of napkin calculations, it didn't make much sense for at least bigger customers to do it in-house. But I think, one other very important aspect is that what I would highlight in terms of differences is that you're still, at least on the sales side, mostly fighting to get the business. But one big difference is that in-house on sales side, you're still mainly dealing with the B2B customer, and you need to understand their needs. It's just that the end users have a really big say in terms of what they're expecting to see from the business you're serving, and that gives you some requirements maybe that you have to fill in. But if you get them right, then it makes the product a lot stickier and retention better over time as well. So it's definitely harder to get started, but I think there's also very different types of B2B2C customers. So maybe to give some examples for the listeners, I think some well-known ones could be Shopify or Stripe, but there you also have very big split between the end users and the internal users. Like, for example, Stripe, you have the checkout product that is for the end users, and you need to very clearly understand what are the needs for the end users, but you also have a huge back office for the B2B side, and that needs to fulfill the needs of your direct customer as a Stripe. In identity verification case, also, if you're starting out, mostly the end user flow that defines how successful your product is, and in later stages, getting the bigger customers, they need to see the analytics and all the other back office stuff. So I think the balance can really vary in those B2B2C customers. I think you already mentioned twice that usually if company decides not to build something on their own, then the decision is about a feature or functionality that's not maybe critical to the core business. And I think in those cases, it can be trickier maybe to get the buy-in or like keep the communication. I'm drifting away a bit with my thought now.
No, but I maybe I can jump in. I think different people pulling at you, right? There's the stakeholders, there's the end users, there's all these people trying to kind of pull you in different directions. And I imagine you've been in those situations a lot. How do you kind of get yourself out of that? How do you manage to still prioritize what to do next?
Yeah, because there's definitely a lot of pressure coming from the sales side, because it's mostly enterprise deals and they have their own demands. But I guess it can be easy to get lost in all those requests. And as a B2B2C company, you can't forget about what's your big end goal. Like, you can't endlessly throw in those custom requests, because most likely you have done your research, or hopefully you have done your research before what's the market you want to target. And those single clients can seem very appealing, but I think that's where the product team's expertise should come in, and that should be the counterbalance to make sure that the business is always moving towards their strategic goals, and don't do one-off solutions that might put them off. And with existing clients, even if those changes are smaller and might not always benefit the core business, it really came down to data in our case when we were talking about the end user product, because there were countless of assumptions made on our customer side that what's wrong with end user or how can we improve it. And their data or input mostly was customer service requests or something they could see their own that were often corner cases. So it's again the saying that loudest bird gets fed. The loudest bird gets fed, and we saw it very often that they were complaining about some customer requests that came in that they couldn't, I don't know, verify themselves with Internet Explorer or some other like very odd cases, and then expected us to solve that. But our capabilities in terms of data and proving those insights to customers were very good. So we could often help them understand better that we know our stuff. We focus on the most often occurring or biggest impact issues, and that really helped us put those non-important issues aside. Like browser issues were just some of those examples.
I want to jump in and ask, because this might be helpful. How would you encourage someone, because you seem to have been in a very lucky position where you had a strong data culture. People knew that these random requests coming in from, Zendesk tickets or whatever were just these loud birds, right? And what's something you would encourage people to try and do if they don't have that data culture, like, because they might be just reacting to all of these incoming requests, feeling overwhelmed? How do you pivot the company and say there's a better way? And what would you kind of advise?
Yeah, I mean, we weren't always in that position. When I joined the company, it was still doing its first steps in terms of being more data-driven or data-informed. And I guess it's first acknowledging the fact that you can't know everything, and if you come across those problems, then always thinking about how I can get the real information in my hand, like not only dealing with those partial puzzle pieces that I get from the end user, or sorry, from the customer, but if they indicate something, then that's something for me to investigate. But I would need to get down to the source myself, and I guess that's something that helped the company build the capabilities of having all that data available over time. But like earlier days, if you don't have it and you're working yourself through it, I guess something I would advise there is just to have a very clear and open relationship with the customers, and have them talk more, or have them give more context by default. If the communication has been set up in a way that they just bombard you with all the issues, and you have no authority or no way to clarify the context or have any access to the end user data, I think it's, if not possible, then very tricky to pull off. But one thing we also were very good at was establishing like long-term and very transparent relationships. That also included giving very transparent responses about our decisions, if something went wrong, if something went very well, being proactive about those things, and that enabled trust essentially for this relationship, and showed us as the experts who needed that data, and that made customers way more willing to share that. I think that's, if you're a small company and don't have all that credibility, that could be a tricky thing. So that's something that comes to mind.
I love the answer. It reminds me of my early days when I was working still in games and trying to get valuable interaction feedback. So does it play well? Does it engaging? Does it have all the buttons it needs? Does it show all the information it needs? And we would go and grab random people and we'd sit them in front of a computer and we'd be filming their hands. So we'd be actually having a camera on their hands. We'd be having a camera on their face, and we'd be screen recording what they were doing. So we would have these 3 individual data streams that we'd be merging together and then trying to rewatch later. And while they were doing it, we were taking notes and trying to also kind of point out things that we wanted to see later to aggregate on. And even in those situations, like even if you got 100 playtesters through, it was still hard with 100 data points to have conclusive evidence to go one way or the other. And a lot of the time, the intuition that we were building became much more valuable, and it seemed to pay dividends a lot more over time. I'm curious, like, where do you sit on that, and how has maybe A/B testing or some other testing been a useful tool for you? And then how do you actually engage with those end users and select them, and where does intuition play as well over time in that?
Yeah, well, end user, like getting access to end users itself, I guess is a very important topic. Again, depends very much on the service or product that you're offering. In my case specifically, we were quite lucky in the position we were in because we were able to collect direct data from the end user flow because we were still hosting it, and we could run A/B tests there. We could see the events coming in, we could see the errors coming in, and so on. So that was a good position to be in. And the trickier part maybe was getting more qualitative data or getting interviews with the actual end users, because even though we had a huge mass of users coming through, in order to get any meaningful aggregation out of their feedback, then we would need a huge mass of users. And because their interaction with us was just like intermediate step for them to get started with that, with what they actually wanted to get started, like we were more like a friction step for them, then I don't think they really had any intention or clear motivation for helping us out or giving us feedback. So
can I jump in as
yeah,
well? Because it's curious, because I think a lot of the customers going through what you would have seen, they're not going to become power users. They're not going to onboard 50 times, right? They're going to do it once, maybe a year at most, if not less, right? So there's a lot of education that you have to put also into your product to try and preempt the knowledge gap that user will have before they even begin using your product. And I'm curious, how did you identify what those things were, and how did you work to maybe make it clearer that we will ask you for, you will need to, then this will happen, and in total it might take this much time? I'm asking again to maybe share a framework for anyone that's listening to say, like, you don't assume that the user knows what you know, because they probably don't. And then if you're not going to get a second chance with them, you might need to front load that a bit more than you would with something where they can keep coming back and incrementally becoming a power user of a product.
Yeah, like the power user term in identity verification doesn't really make much sense because as you said, the least amount of interaction they have, they actually better for them and better for us as well, because we want to make it seamless. But I guess that's also the reason why the quantitative data played more importance for us. And I think the main thing that I remember from that time was the product team that had the end user product team that had set up this kind of end user funnel. So every step that the user had to take in the end user flow was identified by an event, and then we had those graphs for the funnel, like how many people drop off in every stage, and then
and this is already building that data that you then use, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that was one of the first things I remember having. And then essentially the end goal was to increase the number of customers that come through. We obviously knew that in some of the steps the drop-off would be higher, but in general, you could identify the biggest leaks in the funnel in that sense. And it also was very helpful when we went after different markets. So you could see that in some markets, a lot of users dropped off in the first step already, or like giving access to the camera and microphone, for example. On other markets, they failed with taking the document photo, but maybe the selfie, taking the selfie was very successful because they didn't feel comfortable about sharing the document, and we could use those learnings that we had in general funnel to identify the problems with those specific country-specific or customer-specific funnels, and then create some assumptions or ideas based on that, and then start testing them out, because it often was trial and error, or coming up with different ideas on how to solve those specific problems or steps. And I, in general, am mostly skeptic about A/B testing, but I don't know whether it was the product team that pulled it off a really nice day, but we had those weekly overviews, and we shared very good overviews to the customers as well about what we were testing and why we were testing, and the improvements were like very constantly flowing in because we had a large user base. The tests were live for a week, two, and if there was a clear improvement, we made the improvement. And during my time here, the end user flow changed completely, and the conversion rates were much better. And it definitely came down to being able to identify those issues and problems in every step of the flow. And maybe the trickier part was identifying the parts of the flow that weren't in our control. So what are the steps on the customer side that the end user has to take before ending up in our flow? That was the part that was harder to track, but also offered some improvements for us. So I think it all came down to having that visibility into the end user flow.
No, I love it. I had a similar experience with the camera part of what we were building at Lava, and we were getting just random stuff back because, we were asking people to basically try and take a picture of a QR code, but it was a proprietary kind of label, and things mattered. The angle, the lighting, the reflection, the this, and then we had all of the like you were talking about, metrics and numbers. For us, we had the processing speed of when we did get the image, and the image was the right quality, and the processing then began. It was like 8 seconds, which was just unmanageable. That was like too long. We couldn't keep someone waiting there in front of a product like a wine or a honey, trying to get a confirmation, yes, you can, no, you can't buy it. And 8 seconds was just horrendous. So there's a lot of stuff that we did to try and optimize that. And the reason I'm sharing this is it's not a proud moment, but it's workable, right? And I think what happened is there was API changes that we were doing, and that was maybe shaving off, 7/10 of a second, and there was the OpenCV code, which was the processing code, having a leaner model, which was a little bit more effective and could run fast. So the 5 to 3 seconds was like the big win. But eventually we still kind of sat there and we had seconds to deal with, and we started working on the actual UI. We said, well, let's hide the fact that the time has started. Let's give them a bit more. And we created these cool snap animations. So when you took the picture, it would animate and it would like zoom in and show you this is the picture you made. And that gave us 2 seconds. And then we would do a little scanning animation on top of that. That gave us like another half a second. And so all these things ended up with the end user only perceivably waiting about a second and a half. And the results from that were amazing. We were still sitting at 5, but we just padded it out with animations and storytelling on the sides of it to make someone engaged enough in the process of what was happening. And for me, that was a big learning as well. As like, we don't need to fix the underlying problem. We have to fix the experiential problem at the customer level. The customer is counting those seconds. And it reminds me of the story, and I don't know if this is true, but I think that the Empire State Building, they built these giant elevators, and people were complaining how slow the elevators were, and supposedly someone put a mirror up, right? And then people stopped complaining because they could look at themselves while they were in the elevator. So sometimes it's the easy solutions are there and they're in front of you. Yes, still optimize the actual core stuff. In my experience, that's necessary, but you're going to get diminishing returns there. And you need a strategy to counteract the other side of it. A similar thing as well, this is not in seconds, but in days. When I first joined...
Can I ask before?
Yeah, go.
About the example you gave.
Yeah.
How did you come up about discovering the problem? Like, was it also based on the data you had available on your side, or was it the end users complaining? Was it some kind of a hybrid of that?
Definitely. So it was a hybrid of it. So it was the qualitative stuff that we were observing because we were putting these things into the shelves and seeing how people would interact with it, which was the creepy stalker part of it. The other side of it was who waited and then interacted with the following screens and who walked away. And we had the quantitative data for that of scan initiated, and then we also knew the failure rate. So how many times did someone reattempt it? If the lighting was bad, what kind of information should we provide them so they try again, so they don't think it's them? So we also learned very early on that people, if we said it's not you, it's me, we would get them to try it like at least 2 more times. But if it seemed like for any moment of time that it was completely on them, they would disengage and turn off and just move on. They'd be like, I don't want this. And that was a really bad brand experience as well for the product that had the label on it. So there was a lot of work that went into trying to understand that. And there was lots of observation, but also we had the kind of baseline data in the background. And then when we started making...
But was it also then that the end users were complaining to your customer, or like how did you?
Yeah. No. The brand experience part was very obvious. It's like these things are annoying. It would come in as a Zendesk ticket to our clients, which was bad. But from the experience of our clients basically saying, this is horrible, you need to fix this, or we won't go live, was also very valuable information. And that's the other example I wanted to share, because at one point we tried to make the labels smaller so they could be less intrusive into the overall packaging. And that created a whole bunch of problems we'd never dealt with because we never had the label at a smaller kind of visual size. So our clients were basically threatening that we won't work with you unless you can fix this. And again, the whole team trying to figure out like what would we need to do to make this work at that smaller scale. And so lots of learnings like that came out of it.
Yeah, got it.
The reason I wanted to mention the Wise example as well is because when I first joined, there was some internal processes that were taking, I don't know, let's say days. And part of the kind of processing steps required going to the end users and saying, hey, could you please give me this additional bit of information which I'm missing? Which was obvious when the whole payment stopped. But it required a manual intervention of someone going in, seeing that that's what happened, and then formulating an email, sending it to the the customer, and then getting that information back to continue with their process. And that meant that there was a 3-4 day delay, which was unnecessary. And so one of the things that, because of those other experiences I had, one of the most obvious things to me in that situation was like, we need to kick off a self-service. We need to kick off something that basically emails the customer instantly and tells them there's a likelihood, it's not certain because no one's looked at it yet, we haven't had that manual review, but there's a likelihood that we need some additional information, which is probably this. Would you mind providing that? And even though they didn't have to provide that, even though they could skip that step, it already told the customer that there's going to be a delay. And the amount of complaints that dropped as a result of that, even though the process still might have taken 5 days, even though they might not have gotten back to us in time, just the managing of the situation and telling them there's going to be a delay was a huge win for the overall customer experience. And sometimes being aware of that and those little wins of just saying, look, we're going to need something, and we might need a day to get back to you, is also very beneficial in those circumstances. So I just kind of thought I'd throw that in there.
I think that's a good example of how you can reason to the customer why you should have the access to the end users, or being able to either draft up the terms and conditions in a way that you're legally allowed to contact them. But I think in a lot of cases, it might be harder to explain the need, or it's just adding a lot of complexity on the customer side as well. Like if you're talking about emails, then they probably have their own email flows, and then you want to throw in something in there if maybe it's coming from a different address and so on. So justifying that need can definitely be tricky, but at least like you need to have somebody enable it first so you can prove that it adds huge benefit, because that's, again, like if you're starting out with the assumption that it will help the conversion flows or reduce the number of complaints, then you can't really back it up before you have the proof, right?
But for product, because 100%, for products, I think that you get multiple usage out of. You can start without it and then opt in. So you can tell your clients, look, how about we, A/B test or beta test, or get 10% of your users to opt in for this additional bit of feedback that we can provide them. And we believe on those 10% of users, your customer support numbers will drop. And if you can make a case for it and just ease the client in, then the risk and reward is much smaller. But it's much easier for them to say, okay, let's give this a go. I can always turn it off, and I can always apologize to the 10% if it's too annoying. So those are I think important things. And when you're into that delivery mindset where you're also providing additional information in this B2B2C environment, where there might be information you want to provide for the customer to then make a buying decision, that can enable your client to make more revenues because you're some kind of data provider that's enabling that. And rather than going through your client and asking them to package it up, you know how to package the information up and you can talk directly to them. That can be a huge win. And again, you can show them, you can say, let's try it with 1% or 10%, and let's look at the conversion numbers. Let's see how many of them are actually taking the action to do whatever you would like them to do. So I think there's some balance there where it's just goes beyond maybe fulfillment, but also helping educate on particular topics those end users. And I think that's a win as well.
Yeah, I think that's a rather good example, because it's easier to build a case that way. But if I'm bringing up some examples from the A/B testing, then we definitely had that experience that everybody wanted improved end user flow, but nobody wanted their customers to have A/B tests run on, because like there were some reasonable reasons for that as well, like the fact that their help desk FAQs and stuff were built on top of the current flow. And then we ran those A/B tests, and then they complained to customer support that they don't understand what they need to do. And customer support is also, oh, I've also never seen this screen in my life before. And then they come complaining us that, hey, how can you change those things like that? But thing is that everybody wants us to get better, but we can't get better if we don't run those tests. So we definitely had some examples with like bigger customers who demanded to be opted out from those, and we could provide that, but we still needed to have a very good sample set of customers so we could move quickly and get that critical mass of users testing those things. So it was definitely a paradox there that we needed to battle with, and I think it sums up the B2B2C experience quite well.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just throw one more thing where I've had success in identifying VIP customers as a way to get that initial 1%, because they, like you said, the customer support team needs to know that this is already a different type of customer. So when requests come in from them, they need to be reading different documentation. And if your client already has a concept of a VIP and they have a different flow or a different support team or a different management style for those types of customers, you will be able to test things out on them. And if you don't have VIPs, you might have budget customers. I've not done that. I've not tried that. But if you have budget customers who are, you clearly identified they have a membership to get a discount or whatever it is, and they're just very price conscious, you could always select that as a group. So you don't have to just randomly pick 1% and have all these different use types, use cases mixed into one. You can get a particular persona, focus on their use case, and see if you can prove the model on that, which I think then opens the way for other things, especially since your legals and your T's and C's and all those things will already have been done for the initial case. So then rolling it out for additional personas would be a much... Well, it'll still be a lot of work. Let's not sugarcoat it, but at least it'll be worthwhile, and it'll be clearer to everyone what the steps will be and what's required.
Yeah, because it sounds like it just comes down to the incentives that you can offer those different personas or customer segments. And showing last example here, then with our biggest customers, we could maybe offer them a better price point, or if they didn't want to be involved, then we obviously didn't want to lose the customer as well. But with smaller ones, that's where we couldn't really give them those options on our side, and they were accepting it because they understood that they are just either trying it out or they're on a low package on the self-serve platform, and the general incentive was still to improve the product over time. But it's sort of that not in my backyard issue that please test, but not on my users.
I love it. And look, thank you so much for the chat and kind of unpacking all of these examples. For me, it's been fun, but I think I also learned a few things from what you were saying, and that whole idea of having that benchmark baseline for data just to help make those decisions. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. Also super interesting. Learned a few new tips for the B2B2C, and hope the same applies for the listeners.